So Franz Kafka is one of those authors who I've always known about, but at the same time I haven't ever really dived all that deeply into his work. He's best known for a short story, The Metamorphosis, which is about a guy, Gregor, who wakes up one day to find out that he's transformed into a beetle-like creature. And it's kind of interesting how his work has been dispersed because of the fact that he died very young. He died at about the age of 40 due to illness. And so what that means is that none of his novels were finished before he passed away. And while some stories were published during his lifetime, many of the stories that we have now by him are incomplete. And while I think it was a great shame that he was not able to finish any of his books, such as The Trial, which we'll be talking about today, I think that in their current state, they are still phenomenal. The Trial is a book that has a very interesting premise, I think, which is that there is a man, Joseph K., who is accused of being guilty of something without being told what it is. In essence, in the case of Joseph K., it is not innocent till proven guilty, but guilty till proven innocent. And so before I opened this book up, I was expecting like a courtroom drama, essentially. I was expecting the second half of The Stranger. I was expecting the brothers Karamazov, which we'll get into in a bit. And while there are some courtroom scenes, and while Joseph K. does talk to lawyers, at the same time, it's not really a court drama in the traditional sense. The book starts with Joseph K. waking up in the morning one day and seeing two men who tell him that he's under arrest. And Joseph K., of course, asks what his crime is, and they tell him that they don't know. They're just there to arrest him. The two men then take him to a character called the Captain, and the Captain informs Joseph K. that he's being arrested, but at the same time, it's not a typical arrest. He's not going to be taken to prison or anything like that. He is told that he is allowed to just go about his normal life and to continue working at the bank where he works and so on. And so basically from there, these people who have arrested him just leave. And so Joseph K., I think, feels a very heavy mental weight. It's very emotionally draining to be told that he's being accused of something without knowing what it is, and he wants to not be accused. He wants to be found innocent as soon as he can in order to get back to his life, which hasn't really changed that much since his arrest. Really, the biggest thing that has changed since his arrest is that people know that there is a case going on involving him. They know that something is happening with him, and so he wants to clear the air. He wants to be found innocent as soon as possible. He hires a lawyer. He considers hiring other lawyers. He considers writing a plea to the courts, telling them of his innocence and declaring that he is an innocent man who's done nothing wrong. But he realizes that in order to do that, since he doesn't know what crime he's being charged with, he would just have to write a huge life story, a huge autobiography, essentially explaining every aspect and every action that he's taken throughout his life. And I think the most interesting thing about this book is the way that Joseph K. responds to being told that he's guilty. Early on, even though he's never officially summoned down to the court, he goes there anyway. And so essentially, this book is about a man who is charged with a crime. He is told that he is guilty of something, and at any moment, really, he could just ignore it. He could just leave. While he does question the higher authority, while he does question this court, he honestly puts up with it. Kafka is a writer who I think is very obsessed with the idea of guilt. He seems to be obsessed with the idea of a higher authority telling you that you are not worthy. And the kind of guilt that Kafka is obsessed with is a very different guilt than what Dostoevsky is obsessed with, for instance. Because Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment and in The Brothers Karamazov, he writes a lot about guilt. In both of these books, he talks about the idea of whether or not you should feel guilty for murdering someone lesser than you, for murdering someone who you think deserves it. And in The Brothers Karamazov, he talks about the idea of feeling guilty for a murder even if you weren't committing it. He asks the question, if you knew that something was happening and you did nothing to stop it, are you guilty of murder as well? Or he asks the question, if you hate someone but you don't kill them but someone else does, are you kind of guilty of the murder as well? Because in that instance, even though your hand wasn't holding the knife, you certainly would have been willing to. And so the guilt that Dostoevsky talks about in his books is really sort of spiritual in nature. Dostoevsky writes a lot about morality and religion and intelligence in secular society. And he talks a lot about the source of morality, and if we don't have a supreme high being that we believe in, where do we get our morality from? In Dostoevsky's work, the guilt that the characters struggle with is complex. It's multifaceted. As I'm saying, in The Brothers Karamazov, there are a lot of different ways that you could argue for certain ideas. But in something like The Trial, the protagonist, Joseph K., is told that he's guilty of something by a higher authority who is infallible. He's told that he's guilty, but of what, he has no clue. And so the kind of guilt that Kafka writes a lot about is much more emotional, and it's more internal than anything else. It's just an overall feeling of badness and depression and the eating away of oneself. And so really, I think that at the core of the book, the question that The Trial is asking is something like, If we are told that we are lesser people, if we are told that we are bad people, and we go along with it, how responsible are we for how we feel? One thing that's so interesting to me about the trial is that Joseph K. is told that he's guilty, yet there are no immediate ramifications for his arrest. His life doesn't really change that much. He does have an uncle that finds out about the case that Joseph K. is involved in and who tries to help him by passing him off to a lawyer friend. And Joseph K. does take actions to try to be found innocent. He visits this lawyer many times. He visits a painter who's friends with the judges. He tries to learn more about this court system that the more you learn about, the more confusing it seems to be, because it's not really an official court. Or is it? The courts themselves are very confusing, and who exactly is charging Joseph K. with the crime of being guilty is unseen. It's super unclear. And so basically Joseph K. is told that he's guilty of a crime. He doesn't know the crime. He doesn't know who's accusing him. He doesn't understand what he can do to prove his innocence. And instead of just shrugging his shoulders and going on with his life, he faces all of this, and in a way, he gives it a kind of credit. By acknowledging the court, and by going to the court repeatedly, and by putting up with all the nonsense that he has to deal with, even though he's not told what his crime is, and even though none of this is really official or lawful, he still puts up with it, and he chooses to engage with this case. As I've read more of Kafka's work, I think that his stuff can be read in many different ways. But as I was reading this book, it called to mind a discussion that I had in an English class a couple of years ago. Basically, one of my professors just made an offhand comment, something to the extent that what you say on social media doesn't really matter, because a lot of social media is fake. On a lot of social media, you don't actually know who the other person is. Oftentimes you'll talk to someone who's just a username and an anime profile picture, and that's cool. But for that reason, my professor was saying that social media doesn't actually matter. But then one of the students challenged this point of view and said that there are people who've lost their jobs due to things that they have said on social media. There's very much such a thing as getting canceled. And so the student was saying that these people might disagree with what my professor was saying. From the student's point of view, these people might say that what you say on social media does matter. And I thought about this for about 5 seconds on how to reconcile the professor and student's point of view, and I kind of realized what you say on social media only matters if you let it matter. It's like a kind of silly thing where it's like you can only be canceled if you want to be canceled. Some people get canceled for minor things and they're never seen again because they go along with it. And then other people get canceled rightfully so, and it's more than canceled. It's like they're found guilty of committing horrible crimes, and then they just keep on going like nothing happened, and they continue to have a good career. And so I feel like The Trial, more than anything else, is a book about feeling guilty in society. It's a book about being told that you're wrong, about being told that you're guilty, that you don't fit in. And instead of shrugging your shoulders, you just go along with it and you say, okay, what can I do to fit in? What can I do to prove my innocence? It calls to mind how a lot of people will want to be cool, and so they'll do the necessary things to fit in. They'll dress a certain way, they'll talk a certain way, they'll put on a facade, they'll put on an act. Really, I think that The Trial calls into question how much power we give to those that despise us. And as I keep on saying, that was my big takeaway of the book, is the fact that at any point, Joseph K. could have just been done with the court. He didn't have to worry about any of this. Instead, he tries to rush his case along, he tries to become more involved, he tries to speak to judges, speak to lawyers, but really all of it was kind of fake, or at least it struck me as that way. And without jumping into spoilers, ultimately Joseph K. does receive a punishment for his crime, but really, even in that chapter, he only receives the punishment because he goes along with it. Throughout the book, he has many opportunities to stop his insane pursuit of the case, because at a certain point, it really does feel like he is the one pushing the case along, as opposed to other people. At a certain point, it almost feels like other people have forgotten about the case, except for him, but he's so desperate to be proven innocent that he won't just let the case fade into memory. And so really, I think The Trial is a special book, because I think that it forces the reader to call into question who has power over them. What anonymous, faceless people or ideas have power over you? Who lives rent-free in your head? And I'm sure that pretty much everyone has someone or something that lives in their head rent-free that they want out of there. It could be an ex, it could be an ex-best friend, it could be an old boss, it could be a current boss. It could be an idea, it could be an ideal that you're not living up to. It could be a family member, a parent, a spouse. It could just be society. The spotlight effect is a very real thing, and if you don't know what that is, basically it's just this idea that because you are constantly with yourself, because you're constantly in your own head, you think that you're more important than you actually are in the eyes of others. Because you are constantly having to pay attention to yourself, you think that everyone else is also paying attention to you, when in reality, they are paying attention to themselves. And so I think that's what the book is about, is it's about invisible forces that haunt us and haunt our minds wherever we go. Wherever Joseph K. goes, he always has the trial, he always has the court case in the back of his mind. He can't enjoy life because he's too focused on what other people think of him, even though there isn't really a huge effect one way or the other what they think of him. Joseph K. is told that he's guilty, and because of the fact that he seeks to prove his own innocence, because of the fact that he works so hard to prove his own innocence, it almost feels like that is confirming his guilt. Basically, I think that if someone accuses you of being guilty of something and you're innocent, there's only so much to do. If it's an official, lawful state court case or something of that nature, that's completely different. But if there's just someone online who tells you, you know, hey, you're guilty of this crime, then I honestly think that oftentimes fighting it is just, it's a lose-lose situation. And I think that this book carried a special kind of weight for me as a YouTube creator, essentially because I get all these faceless comments every single day. Many of them are nice and kind, and I appreciate it, but at the same time, there are some, for instance, that wildly misinterpret things that I say, and oftentimes I just won't even engage with those comments because I see it as a losing battle, basically. It's a battle that's impossible to win. If someone has decided they don't like you, then there's nothing you can really do except just be yourself. Really, as much as I've repeated myself over the years, I do think that be yourself is the best piece of advice you can give to someone. Kafka had a lot of problems with his dad, and he wrote this letter to his father, or letter to the father. It's translated different ways sometimes. But essentially, if you read it, then you'll kind of figure out why Kafka is so interested in guilt. And it's a very sad and tragic letter. One last thing I wanted to comment on is the fact that I'm talking intentionally about literature while wearing my Health Ultra Kill shirt. Basically, the reason I'm doing this is because I feel like there is this sort of pretentiousness surrounding literature. I feel like it's really easy to feel like literature is something high, something mighty, but really in my eyes, literature, books, novels, whatever you want to call them, reading is for everyone. And so if I can do my part in making literature seem more accessible, then that's a pretty cool thing, I guess. So that's why I didn't dress up for this video. In other words, that's why I'm dressing exactly as I would for any other video. But this book is awesome. I think it's the best thing I've read from Kafka so far, and I really appreciated it. It definitely causes you to reflect on who you are giving power to. As I was saying, it feels like there are so many seemingly invisible faces or entities that are over us at any given moment that seem to be watching every footstep that we take. But sometimes it's just all in your head. Sometimes it's you causing yourself to see phantoms where there are none. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night, and goodbye.